Hola chicos, en este video vamos a hablar del pretérito. We'll be discussing the preterite, or the simple past tense, in this video, and specifically we'll be looking at regular verbs, how they conjugate in the preterite tense. We'll also look at some irregulars, our usual suspects, ir, ser, dar, right? Once a regular, always irregular, typically. And then we'll also look at some irregular verbs that actually follow patterns. So they are irregular, but they're a little bit more predictable. Okay? Now, depending on what class you're in with me for this video, I might ask you to watch only portions of it. We're going to cover a lot of ground in this video. So if you are watching the entire video at once, you're absolutely going to need to pause. You're probably going to need to rewind. So just keep that in mind as we go. There'll be several slides where you'll need to write out and take notes on verb forms. And so make sure that you pause it instead of being like, oh man, the video's too fast. Well, yeah, that's because you didn't use your pause button, okay? So keep that in mind as this video goes along, that you do have the ability to go back and rewatch anything you need, okay? So let's get started. The preterite works exactly like the present tense works in what we think of forming it. So how do you form a present tense verb? Well, you take off the ending, you decide who's performing the action, whether it's yo or tu amigo, and then you put an ending on it, right? We do the same thing in the past tense. The only difference is we have new endings. So for our AR verbs, and this would be a really good time to pause it, you're going to use these endings, okay? So we know that this is yo, tú, él, ella, or usted, nosotros, vosotros, ellos, ellas, ustedes, okay? These are your endings for those forms. Notice that you really have to pay attention to the accents that come and go when we go from the present tense to the past tense, or the preterite, because even though it's an AR verb, it does take this E right here. That doesn't matter, but it does have an accent. Here, when you have an O, make sure you put a tilde or an accent on it. And in the next slide, we'll look at why that's important. So after you've copied all this down and had the opportunity to pause it, go ahead and move on. We'll look at some examples. Move my camera here. So let's look at hablar. Hablar is always our go-to example, right? So in the present tense, we have the endings here in green. O, as, a, amos, ais, an. Simple. In the past, or the preterite tense, we have e, aste, o. Amos, astes, aron. So all you're doing is you're keeping the stem, ab. That doesn't change. You're just using a different ending, and that's the part I've placed in green. And the comment I made about making sure that you are careful with the tildes, here, hablo does not mean the same thing as hablo. Hablo means I speak. Habló means he spoke, or she spoke, or you, formal, spoke. Okay? So again, this video is going a little bit fast, but it's because I'm relying on you to be taking notes. Okay? So this is just a comparison of the present tense forms versus the simple past, or the preterite tense forms of one verb. Now, once you've got that down, let's go ahead and move on to ER and IR verbs. The cool thing about these verbs is they actually take the same endings, so you don't have to remember a third set of endings. It's kind of like a twofer, right? So again, you'll want to pause and make sure you get these down straight. Don't forget that tilde right here and the tilde right here. One goofy thing about the preterite tense is we almost never see a tilde in the vosotros form, which we always saw it in the present tense. Kind of weird. So again, we'll look at a comparison from present to past tense. And we're going to use the verb vivir. Again, we have o, es, e, imos, is, en, right? Easy peasy. Here we're doing the same thing. We're just changing the endings, and that's what changes it to past tense. So instead of yo vivo, we have yo viví. Instead of tú vives, we have tú viviste. Okay? Instead of él vive, we have él vivió. Again, you want to pay special attention to that tilde right there. What you might have noticed on the AR verbs and on the ER-IR is that the nosotros form is the same. The exception is going to be an ER verb like comer. Nosotros comemos, nosotros comimos. But for IR verbs, it looks the exact same, right? Vivimos, vivimos. How do you know if it's present or past tense? Well, context. If I say yesterday, obviously we're talking about past tense, okay? So once you've got those squared away, feel free to move on. We're going to look at some irregular ones. Let me see if I can find a good spot for my camera here. I think I just moved it off. So here we go. We have dar, which it thinks it's an IR verb, right? So it conjugates like di, diste, dio, dimos, distes, dieron. Again, fantastic time to pause, okay? Then we have ser and ir, which actually conjugate the exact same, which is totally goofy to us. Fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fuistes, fueron. Again, if you see fui, how do you know if it's I was or I went? Well, we're going back to context. If I say, yo fui a la playa, to the beach, then obviously I went to the beach, not I was to the beach, right? So you want to be careful with that. It's always about context. Once you've paused this and copied down these forms, feel free to go ahead and continue. We're looking at some irregular preterite verbs. These are, some people call these U verbs because they all take a U in the stem somewhere. These verbs take a different ending. We'll see the pattern ending here, regardless of whether they are AR, ER, or IR. That no longer matters. So these are super irregular, but they do follow a bit of a pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and click through. We'll notice estar becomes estuve. That's kind of the root there. So estar becomes estuve. Tener becomes tuve. And I'm just saying the yo form here. Andar becomes anduve. Poder becomes pude. Poner becomes puse. Saber becomes supe. You'll want to just be aware of these and make sure you have them in a handy place when you're studying. Once you've copied the previous slide down, if you didn't, go back. Then we're going to look at what some people call I and J verbs. And the reason they're called the I verbs is because, for example, the verb hacer doesn't have an I anywhere in it. But when we look at the preterite tense, all of a sudden we have an I. Okay? Don't worry about why it's there. Just accept it and learn it and practice with it, okay? So hacer becomes hice, hiciste. Ooh, crazy spelling. Hizo with a Z. And that's for a phonetic reason, or the way it sounds. I won't get into it in this video, but it can't be H-I-C-O, okay? Querer becomes quise, etc. Venir becomes vine, etc. So these are our I verbs. Next, we're going to look at our J verbs. And this is because they take a J now in the preterite tense. So decir becomes dije, traer becomes traje. Notice they have a J in all of its forms, right? The one big difference between the I and the J forms is that this becomes jeron, this is hieron. So you want to be aware of that, okay? Now, once you've got those copied down, let's go ahead and move on to a group we call car, gar, zar. These are verbs that are super goofy, but only in the yo form, okay? So, oh, and I'm going to have to move my area here. So these are verbs that end in car, buscar, sacar, tocar, etc. In the yo form, it becomes busqué. This change only happens in the yo form, and again, it's because of a phonetic reason, because of the way it sounds. You don't need to worry about it. You just need to remember it, okay? So this would be busqué, saqué, toqué, all with this spelling, Q-U-E with a tilde, okay? So ojo con eso. Then we have our gar verbs. Gar becomes G-U-E with a tilde. This is pronounced ge. So llegar instead of would be llegué, pagar, pagué, investigar, investigué, obligar, obligué. So you can see an example down here. Again, we're keeping the stem the same, that blue portion. We're only changing the ending at the very end. And I apologize, that G should be pink. So verbs that end in Z-A-R for the yo form have a C with a tilde. So empezar becomes empecé, comenzar, comencé, etc. You'll notice there's an example here at the bottom, okay? So all you have to do, just like every single time you conjugate a verb, is you got to take off the ending and add a different ending depending on who's verbing. These ones are a little bit extra special because of the way we're taking off the C-A-R and replacing it with a Q-U-E. That's it, okay? Nothing too crazy. If you have any questions about this, make sure to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Adios.